thank you very much for coming, Tim, and welcome.
Thank you.
So, first of all, really, I think maybe if you tell us a little bit about Vorboss and where you operate and what you do before we get cracking, just to got a little bit of context.
Sure, and I'll try not to bore the people that
They'll let you know
familiar,
very quickly.
I think the key thing to make sure is that when you leave here and you kind of look under your feet as you're walking to the tube or walking to your next stop is what you will see is a whole bunch of telecoms chamber lids with Vorboss logos in them. We very quietly started building our network, our physical network, about 4 years ago, which was something that we did actually largely in secret. COVID gave us fantastic cover for a lot of that as well. Where that brings us today is that we operate one of the largest, if not potentially the most dense business-only fibre network in London. We're around 400 people. We're very proudly vertically integrated. I think we've got it up there. And what that means is that we don't use any contract workforce in the actual building of our network. So from that kind of cable to invoice way of thinking about it, or I think some people have coined cable to customer, we actually have that ability to sell directly to the customers, an asset that we built with our own hands, with people that we trained in-house. But yeah, I think the business is now rapidly approaching 20 years old. I started it a long time ago now, but we've been in the sort of business connectivity space for most of the last decade.
Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Tim is that I live in a field, in a house, but in the middle of Norfolk, which, if any of you aren't familiar with England's geography, is a very rural area that's not very far distance-wise from London, but is a different universe. So it really irritates me that in so many cities, and London in particular, you get this competition through overbuilding infrastructure so that people like me, well, I got a fibre to my home because I just made my MP so unhappy, he gave in. And I think he made BT do it. But anyway, so you either have no or one supplier, or in London you have 20. And this seems to me a bit of a stupid model. Tim clearly has other ideas. So explain to me why this competing infrastructures are good.
Right. So when you put it that way, it sounds mad, doesn't it? But I think that like all these things are devils in the detail a little bit. So firstly, we distinguish that I think business and residential are sort of very different to the extent that we all use the same kind of physical input of fibre. That's sort of where the similarities end. Whether that's in terms of the regulatory requirements that come with dealing with consumers and the way you process payments and the kind of contracts you have to have, all the way through to actually the physical topology of these networks. And it probably comes down to one fundamental understanding, which is as a resident, for most people, and I accept this has changed a little bit since COVID, but for most people, a broadband outage at home, an internet outage at home, is an inconvenience. It might be incredibly frustrating, but it's still really an inconvenience. For a business, it's loss of revenue. And for a business, it's a critical service. And that, particularly in the last decade, has really, really changed. So, we talk a lot about what was it like a decade ago. Think 2012 London Olympics. Everyone can kind of usually remember what their work life was in 2012 if you were living in London. Back then in most offices, if the internet went down, probably the phones were still working because they were on a separate line. Probably you had some servers in your office, so you could still do some of your work. You probably weren't using any cloud applications at that point, so you probably weren't using Google Docs. You probably weren't using Office 365. So actually, you probably could still work at 50% efficiency, and a customer would phone up and you'd say, yeah, our email's down right now, but how can I help? And you could do a lot. And little by little, cloud adoption, which has been kind of great for our business, has meant that we've now got to a point where that connectivity is business critical, and it has the sort of similar impact as having an electrical outage in your building. So I think that's a really fundamental thing to understand. And once you start to understand that, it means that you have to look at the networks in a totally different way. The kind of quality of engineering you have to put into a business network is fundamentally different. So we posit that you can't really do both well. You can't build a residential network and offer services to the most demanding businesses. Sure, you can do very small businesses, and you're still probably going to create loss of revenue when you have outages. But engineering to the cost point you have to be able to do to reach your field in Norfolk doesn't work when you're trying to serve a large investment bank. And so really that needs totally different networks. So to the extent there's overbuild, we exist in the same, its infrastructure exists in the same area, but in the same way that cargo flights are coming in and out of a passenger airport, they're serving very different needs.
See, good explanation, I thought that, really. Okay, and looking at London, which you serve, and you started off particularly dedicated to enterprise customers, how would you describe London's readiness for businesses in terms of, I don't know, capacity and
so I think
service?
I hinted at this when we last spoke, and I think we've one of the opportunities you have, and I know there are some of our friends from much older networks in the room as well, who have the real challenge of having to maintain a lot of legacy, right? Yeah. And I think it's always easy to sit as the sort of relative newcomer or challenger and say how easy everything is. But the reality is we do have it a bit easier because we don't have to maintain our legacy business. We don't have to bring that on a journey. We got to set a new standard. And where we decided to set that mark was a minimum of 10 gigabit bandwidth. So these are just for the more technically minded, it's dedicated fiber direct from the data center to the customer's premises every time. There is no passive optical component. There are no street cabinets. There's no street furniture, and it also means there's no active equipment in the street, which means a power loss in a neighborhood halfway between the data center and the office isn't going to create an outage. Obviously, that's very demanding and intensive in terms of the amount of fiber you need to do that. So we use very high count fiber cables and so on. But all of that is to say, we went out with the ask of deliver no less than 10 gigabit, totally uncontended. So upload, download, 10 gig, no PON, proper enterprise grade service, and to then make a standard product of 100 gig. So I think we're the only provider still in the market who actually has a 100 gig product listed on our website with an actual price. It's not a, by price on application. So if you want to spend £3,000 a month with us, we will deliver 100 gig to any location in London. Simple as that. Happy to say the price here, happy to say the price anywhere. And that's quite novel, right? So then the question comes, well, who needs 100 gig? And my response is always all the people for whom 10 isn't enough, right? It's the people who need 11 gig, 12 gig, 15 gig. And I think this is a really interesting mischaracterization of we have coached the entire market, suppliers and customers together, into a world of trying to think about what their usage is rather than into a world of abundance where all technology sort of should end up. Okay,
so I was going to come to this a little later, but let's carry on with that train of thought now. So you think that technology's natural trajectory is one of deflation. Mm-hmm. And for example, if we look in the mobile world and you've got unlimited blah-de-blah-de-blah, unless you're on the network I'm on, but we won't go into that right now, 3G. But the all-you-can-eat sort of thing, but that, as you're beginning to describe here, has not translated into the fixed network.
That's right. So, there's sort of those two tenets, which is that all technology is deflationary, and kind of what comes hand in hand with that is all technology eventually just sort of reaches abundance. We stop thinking about it in a capacity constrained way. So a couple of examples. We don't tend now really to delete photos from our phone. My phone is full of pictures of my dog, and it's not worth my time to delete them because the storage costs are so low that it's effectively in total abundance. And I'm buying storage in increments that are so big that I can no longer even tell you, and I'm a pretty technical mathematical person, I could no longer tell you when I buy for £2 a month more storage from Apple on iCloud, how that correlates to an individual photo. Like I don't even have a sense of scale between these two things anymore because it's abundant, right? And it's easy to imagine, in the same way now that you might have unlimited data on your mobile, you don't particularly think about the data costs of watching Netflix on the bus, right? Is the kind of the one we always say. Yeah, I remember my first mobile phone where, we were talking, 20, 50 pence a message, a text message. So you all used to have weird little behavioral tricks, like instead of sending the message to say I'm ready, or I'm here, or I'm waiting, you just give someone a missed call. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And we did it all to work around the 20p charge because it added up. And so it's a really nice example of how technological abundance has driven a behavioral change, which is no one went out 10 years ago and said, you know what I really need to be able to do is to watch Netflix on the bus. But you create the abundance and the behavior follows. And that's, economically, that's just induced demand. I think that's really interesting. And it's easy to imagine, we all wander around petrified about battery life on these things at the moment, right? It's easy to imagine that, I don't know, 20, 50 years from now, that's a thing of the past and there's not even a battery indicator on your phone because it just lasts and lasts and lasts. And it passively charges some other way at some point in our daily cycle. And it's easy to imagine we'll get there, yet we're still here in businesses obsessed about how much bandwidth we use. And then we say to someone, well, we can have 100 gig for that price. And they go, yeah, but I don't need 100 gig. And it's like, of course you don't need 100 gig. But like you...
Yeah, but nobody needed an iPhone until you found out.
But, and there's another part here as well, which is sort of them moving people in, this comes together with the need to then think about scaling our infrastructure for peak demand. So this is the other thing traditionally we've done very poorly on fixed line bandwidth. So most people will look at their line that comes into their building, which is typically a gig today, and they'll go, well, most of the day it's only doing 200, 300, 400 meg. So it's fine. 100 people sitting there, it's maybe doing 150 meg. And you're like, yeah, okay, cool. What are your peaks? Because you wouldn't provision your electrical network that way. You wouldn't say, most of the day, we're only using 3 kilowatts in our office. But actually, we do have that problem that only 2 people can be in the kitchen at a time and only 1 toaster can be used because otherwise we have a brownout. That's complete nonsense. And so we scale our infrastructure. Electrically, that would be a brownout. We have the same problem with connectivity. And particularly now, we have a sensitivity to that because we're throwing all of these real-time applications like Zoom and Teams and video calls across the top. So as soon as you have that brownout, it's not a web page that's slower to load. It's an interruption to business. And this is a change that we need to kind of create, is getting people to start thinking about peak demand, even though that means a lot of the time your line is 90% idle.
Okay, so I also know that in the last couple of weeks you've introduced a new retail service. Now, when we say retail here, Tim's business has mostly been dealing with enterprises, but now Vorboss is selling through resellers, but also to retail businesses, by which we mean shops, bars, cafes, blah, blah. So I'm wondering why you're interested in that segment, but you told me that was always the intention. So explain that a bit more.
So the ambition was, if you kind of have the belief that it's businesses that stand to lose money if connectivity goes down, and you've built a network that has the reliability to ensure that doesn't happen, or it certainly has a way higher reliability, then it stands to reason that even small businesses are going to suffer from the same problem. So the ambition was always to be in a position that every business in our coverage area we could serve. Every business, and for the moment that means central London, every business in London, we would have a service that matches. Obviously, we sort of start with the real sweet spot, which is enterprise customers, and then we've been able to take all of that experience and kind of bring it all the way down to, and it worked partly because we've had time to engineer in the economies of scale that mean we can now get down to this price point. So it's not like a residential grade network where we're slapping a business sticker on it and giving it to them. This is a proper enterprise product, and we've engineered the cost to a place where we can actually get it into small businesses and retail, so glass front retail, shops, coffee shops, restaurants, bars, that kind of thing.
So, and I guess typically restaurants, bars, coffee shops, and blah, blah, have a lot of people who want to be on the internet all at the same time.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that we see is, like, when was the last time, in London, in central London, where I live and work and spend a lot of time, I think I probably get 10% rejection rate on card transactions, and it's not because I don't pay the bill.
I was going to say, do we need to know this?
No, but when they come and bring you the card reader, right, and that's got to dial in, and that's either going over a separate connection. It's quite often it's actually going over a mobile connection rather than over a Wi-Fi. But if it's a Wi-Fi connection, and then you see that there's a failed transaction because it timed out, it took too long, and like these connectivity issues are creating transactional friction for these businesses, particularly in busy periods. So connectivity is just genuinely costing them money, and it's impacting customer experience, and it can be that last part, when you've just had a nice meal and then you're trying to pay for it, and then it's this bad experience that's out of their control. So it's not just we need Wi-Fi in the venue, although we do have one customer who post-COVID is still using the kind of order at the table over an app model, and all of a sudden they've gone, oh, it's actually really important that the Wi-Fi in our venue works, because it's now fundamentally part of our business model. We're trying to reduce staffing costs, we're trying to figure this out, and all of a sudden that's changed.
Okay, so I think the investment case for better and more infrastructure and more capacity was pretty clear after COVID, and you've talked about previously how that really concentrated investors' minds on the importance of infrastructure, which I think maybe quite a few of us had lost sight of a little bit. What about now? I'm wondering now, as humans tend to, we hold something terribly important, but we're a bit fickle and we're easily distracted by something else. I'm wondering if that COVID effect and that focus on investment has kind of faded somewhat. And I'm also wondering about the work from home model, when most of it, well, I worked from home for 30 years, but I mean, most people didn't but had to. And I'm just wondering how much the work from home and people coming back into the office, how this has all affected your business modelling and your thinking.
Yeah, so I think there's been a big shift in terms of the use of commercial real estate, and we're certainly not done there, right? I think we're seeing a lot of, to put it nicely, kind of reformatting of commercial real estate space and the way offices are used and occupied, and how they're being broken down to be, multi-tenant and vice versa. But I think, but there's a couple of things, like, just sort of universally there. One is, I think TfL had the highest traffic numbers, footfall numbers on the tube ever recorded last week. So I think you can see there is a huge amount of economic activity. Where people go, economic activity follows, right? So I think there's a lot happening in London and in our footprint. I think understanding how to change our services to suit that, and obviously, retail is a great example where all of a sudden that end of the business market needs better connectivity, and is where a lot of people are spending their time. Making sure that we service it with the same 10 gig connectivity, super important. But I think on the office side, I've likened it a little bit to an electrical service. The last thing you turn off is, when the last person leaves the office, you turn off the lights and you can pull out the fiber. But as long as there's that one person there, you still need the connectivity, and it's still important. And the other big shift, which I think most people here will recognize, I think I cannot remember the last meeting I was in our office where there wasn't at least one person on Zoom as well. So previously, I would say maybe 10% of meetings had a remote party where we were in a room. Now, 90+%. And so every meeting now consumes bandwidth. And so working from home has actually, in a lot of cases, put stress on commercial bandwidth, where certainly if you live in Greater London, it's not tricky to have a gig of bandwidth for your one video call that you're on at any given time at home. And then in your office building, the majority of businesses in London are still connected at 1 gig or less, which is staggering. And you think that now you might have 10, 15 meeting rooms, and every single one of them has got a Zoom call going. Bandwidth has all of a sudden become a real problem.
Okay. Going back a bit towards the technology should be deflationary. Telecoms is a funny market because you're in very long horizons, because it takes a long time to build out infrastructure and monetize it, but also you've had a lot of new players, yourself being an example, coming in where incumbents have networks that often were built with public money. And then regulation is supposed to try and level the pitch. I'm just wondering, you've said a lot of European nations have technical debt, and I wondered if you could just elaborate on that a bit and how you think maybe that could be improved.
So I think, I think if you look at the UK market, specifically where we have been able to accelerate what we're doing is as a result of kind of what followed from access to infrastructure regulation. So, we've kind of had the idea for a long time that that the incumbent networks would have to offer some degree of wholesale, and that's what you've seen. But I think the very sort of beneficial regulatory directive was to say, well, actually, no, this needs to be at a lower layer. It needs to be access to the duct infrastructure that we have to provide, because in the same way you can leave your house, jump in your car, and conceivably drive yourself to Edinburgh on the public roads without having to build your own road, that we should probably have the same way of thinking about our telecommunications infrastructure, and the idea that you can pull cables through existing ducts is entirely logical and something that happens in most civilized countries. So I think we were a little late to the party in the UK on that. The interesting thing is actually we're there at a point where the value of the connectivity is really understood. Back to that 2012 to 2022, 23 kind of thing is that actually this is more important than ever. So I think that's been really beneficial in enabling, rather than sort of a level playing field or leveling up, I would sort of characterize it more as providing an on-ramp, because the time to cash flow positivity for a business like ours is now probably like 20 years less or 15 years less than it would have been if we'd had to dig everything. And the other point is the pace of development. So we've been able, people often look at our network map, and I think we're about to put another updated one on LinkedIn later today, and they can't believe how much we built in 4 years. But you have to understand that in old money, when you used to have to dig everything, that was probably a decade and a half of build. It probably takes 4 or 5 times longer to build than when you can reuse a lot of existing infrastructure. So that's good for everyone. It's fantastic from a carbon footprint standpoint, but it's also been really, I think, really good for the economy, because we're able to actually stand up a purpose-built enterprise network in a pretty short space of time. In 4 years, we can do probably what would have been 10, 15 years worth of work in old money.
If I was in your footprint and I wanted service from you, how quick could you get it to me?
I think our record is 24 hours, actually. So it's extremely fast. And this is one of the advantages, on vertical integration, because then what we've done is brought all of that workforce in-house. So we own every part of it. Now, obviously, there are issues around, landlord permissions and other things that we can't control. But to the extent that everybody has the willingness to get it done, we are not the blocker. And because we can, we have our civils team in-house, we have our installation team in-house, we have our networks team in-house, everything is in-house. It's our cable, it's our team, and there are holes that we dig, we can do all this stuff. So we can mobilize things very, very quickly. And more to the point, probably, is that we can deliver certainty in that response. So we have someone that will quickly get on the phone to the council, they'll have a word, they're actually generally very commercially minded when it's a business in their patch that's affected. But you have to have the right conversation, and that's because we're having it, not a contractor. And then we actually can, within minutes, collate all that information and talk to you with certainty about what the possible is, and not basically come to you with excuses of why third parties can't move fast enough, where if you were going to have to use another contractor or cost something out, you'd have to send them a spec, get a quote, they'd have to do a site visit, and we can take a view, and we can also take a commercial view, which is, actually, it's okay, we'll cover the cost to get this done.
Okay, so I hope you thought that was fun. I did. So have we any questions? Oh, yeah, we have. Ooh. Let's start with Kemi here. Thank you, Deb.
Who? Sorry.
Oh, you're going to Robbo. Wow.
Did you? Oh, no, you go. No.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Annie, for introducing us to Tim. It's a very interesting story. I have lots of questions. Maybe we can talk offline as well. One that occurs to me is, many of us in this room have spent most of the last 2 years at conferences where telcos agonize backwards and forwards about what they want to be when they grow up, essentially. And beyond connectivity is a title that's been used to brand entire conferences. You're taking a different model. A model that's very out of fashion in telecom, which is what we would consider to be a kind of utility telco. In other words, we're going to do this one thing, 2 products. We're just going to be really, really good at doing it.
Cool, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm interested in. I'm interested in the reaction that you get when your customers and prospects put you kind of next to other telcos who are thinking, should we become digital service providers or this or that?
Yeah, I think there's a kind of a mixed thing, right? So firstly, we could address the why, but secondly, also, like, I've watched the kind of perplexed, glazed over customer eyes when people start talking about SD-WAN and stuff, and they're like, they don't think they need it, and it's not necessarily their pain point. So I think there's an element of telcos kind of creating products because they're margin hunting, and that's kind of the first point, is I would say that, like, our industry...
Surely not.
Our industry, exactly, has an absolutely terrible reputation, right, of charging totally different prices to different customers for exactly the same thing because of their ability to pay, doing very, very odd things, but also having for years survived on really, really high margins. And I spoke about legacy earlier. It is difficult to transition those businesses into lower margin telcos. You have to find a lot of efficiencies that weren't baked in. So I think one of the advantages we have is we've been ruthlessly efficient from day one, which means that we're able to deliver this at a price point that is very sustainable and gives us the margins we need to survive. So we're not having to kind of margin seek in areas and services that other telcos have had to get into because connectivity's become commoditized. Some of them might point the finger and say that we're half the problem, but as it should be, we're kind of relentless in trying to provide the best service for our customers and to get them into that world of abundance, which also means no more of this kind of fractional bandwidth selling. Do it once, do it right. Give your customers, the guide for our sales teams is always, please, please, please make sure that whatever you give them is going to last 7 years. Because then every conversation we have with a customer can be a conversation with a new customer, not a conversation with an existing customer trying to upsell them.
Camille.
Yes, hi. And just caveat, I used to buy fibre and rights of way many years ago, so I was just so I have a comment and then a question. So I was trying to understand why you were saying the way you do is differently. You're using ducts or something to blow fibre. Well, what's new about that? People have been doing that.
Nothing new, except that until 2019, it wasn't possible to use a lot of that duct infrastructure. It was all there, but third-party networks couldn't use it. So pre-2019, if you wanted to build our network, we would have had to dig hundreds of kilometers of streets.
All right, so you've got some certain rights of way that,
Correct,
like
yeah.
metro or whatever, yeah, okay, and sewers and stuff. Okay, so my next, more of a question is, I agree about the 100 gig. I think 100 gig is the workhorse connectivity, and we could bring it down market. Lots of enterprises, you need it now. I think actually there's a demand for 400 gig. I've just done some work on that. But I think what disappoints me slightly about your proposition is that I agree that there's a lot more demand within those offices because people are streaming all the video, but you're not responsible for what's happening in that office. You are only bringing bandwidth to the office, and we know that enterprise traffic, it grows from the inside out, so from the campus to the edge to the metro. So I'd be so happy if you did tell me you've got partnerships with people who could build better Wi-Fi, so there'd be a managed solution of the lovely fiber and the Wi-Fi. That is what small businesses, actually all businesses need.
Absolutely. So, and there's a couple of things we tackle there. One of the, so two things I'll mention quickly, actually. We do obviously provide what we do into the channel. So we don't want to disrupt unnecessarily people's buying preferences to the extent that, we can look at, we have like sort of two identical hedge funds, for example. One, seemingly identical, I should say. One that is like ardent that they will only buy from the company that owns the fiber because this to them is super important. And then over here, the one that says, no, we buy all of our connectivity through this aggregator who arranges everything and manages all the contracts for us. And we sort of say, look, that's a buying preference. We work with that channel partner. So they can procure either way, and that works. And indeed, many of those then specialize in things like indoor Wi-Fi solutions. The other side of that is we have things like what we call our ERX or Elastic Router product. So one of the classic issues that we come up against is we say, look, we've just dropped a 10 gig high performance line into the customer's premises, and then they go and plug their 1 gig firewall into it because the bottleneck has just moved, right? So then you get into the problem of like, okay, but the CapEx for the 10 gig firewall is a lot of money today. So what we do is we provide that essentially on like a rental model. So we actually have a service where we've worked with the hardware vendors to bring that kit in, and we think of it like a rental car. Actually, in a lot of cases, they still need and want to manage it because of all of the other security operational elements of having a third party manage your firewall is actually kind of problematic. So they want to drive it themselves, but they also don't want to deal with the CapEx. So what actually happens is, they're spending £1,000 a month at the moment on 1 gig connectivity that they got kind of ripped off for. We go in and we give them a 10 gig for $650, and then we spend the rest of the money giving them essentially a rented firewall that they can upgrade at any point. They come in all in at the same price, but now they have this huge expanse of capability. The other key thing is we've then decoupled the relationship between an internal infrastructure, IT infrastructure upgrade, and the telco sort of service upgrade. And those two things can happen independently of one another, which is a big step for a lot of organizations. When you look at the thousands of businesses over the next 5 years that have to go from 1 gig to 10 gig in London, and currently would all have those as a coupled relationship, upgrading internal and telco contracts at the same time.
Okay, so, there's a gentleman at the back. Last one, because otherwise I'm in the firing line for keeping people away from coffee. I'm the most unpopular person in the room. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott McRae from Self Focus. Tim, I was wondering whether you're taking a similar innovative approach to the design of your BSS and operational support systems as to the kind of products approach. Or whether you've got legacy issues there that the kind of bigger providers might have had with their networks.
Do you mean in terms of the systems we use internally to manage the network, or?
Yeah, both those and the business support systems, managing customers, products, billing.
So, that's another talk in of itself. We have a team of about 25 software developers in-house. My background is software development. If you go back far enough, I think we took the view that a lot of the processes, I have another talk I do on this actually, but we build software to support the processes we want to have rather than having processes that are derivative of the software we bought. So in the nicest possible way, things like OSS and BSS are sort of swear words in our organization because we see these as a series of kind of independent systems that work coherently together. And by the way, that sort of gets rid of the monolith that becomes really hard to upgrade. So everything we've done, not only have we looked at it as like, how do you come in and challenge the status quo and just do better and like introduce a step change, but we also have this silly phrase of like, let's not become tomorrow's dinosaur. So let's not just innovate at one point in time, but let's make sure that whatever we put in is something that we can envisage how that will continue to change and update. And we take the same approach with our workforce and internal training, and we track, for example, the average age of our employees, and it should be a straight line. If your average age of your employees goes up by 1 year every year, you have a problem. And it's the same with your technology, it's the same with your software stack, it's the same with everything. So having software that is well integrated but piecemeal allows you to incrementally upgrade and think about everything. So we ultimately, the simple answer to your question is we built almost all of it in-house, or we bought very small things and then integrated it so that we don't have lock-in around the way certain components work.
Thank you very much, Tim.